The following presentation was recorded at the 2025 Southeast Linuxfest in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is licensed under a Creative Commons license. For more information on the Southeast Linuxfest, visit www.southeastlinuxfest.org. Come join us next June.
Hey, look, it's 3 p.m. My name is Isaac, and I'm here to talk to you about home automation. I'm not affiliated with any company or any particular piece of software. I'm just an open source enthusiast and general purpose nerd. I've been interested in home automation since I was fairly young. It always seemed to me like one of those sort of technologies that was glittering on the horizon, promising futuristic utopia, the sort of thing that you would see in like 1950s trade shows and goofy science fiction movies. The first time that I made any sincere effort at home automation would have been in the late 1990s with X10 and a stack of Perl scripts in a trench coat called Mr. House. Maybe some of y'all can remember. It was goofy and it was awkward and it was limited, but it made things seem possible and it made them seem imminent in a way that I thought was exciting. Of course, the landscape has changed an awful lot between then and now. You could go to a big box store right now, your Lowe's or Home Depot, and buy an armload of home automation hardware and carry it home with you and have it working probably within an hour. I've got coworkers who can barely operate a file manager who have robots vacuuming and mopping their houses now. It's kind of crazy. It is not, to me, though, an unambiguously positive development because the stuff that was in the domain of the hacker and the geek is now become fully capitalized, fully productized. Now we have vendor lock-in and we have pervasive data collection and we have limited options of agency as individuals. So the question that we face now is not whether you can automate your house. Certainly you can. The question is, to what extent can you automate it while keeping your open source soul? And that's what I want to talk about. To begin with, let's just make sure that we have sort of a shared understanding of what it is that we're even talking about. When I say home automation, I'm imagining that you're adding a new, beautiful, open source, pulsating brain in the middle of your home, and that this brain is connected to sensors that you've distributed throughout that give it some sort of ongoing ability to monitor conditions in your home, that it's connected to actuators so that it can then change something about the state of the home, that there'll be one or more user interfaces that will allow you to see what it thinks is happening, to reprogram the system, to set up automations and that sort of thing. And of course, you also need some sort of a network to connect everything together so everything can speak. Before we talk about anything specifically, though, I want to take a pause and just sort of imagine that perhaps many of you are thinking about doing home automation. Maybe you're interested or considering it as a possibility, and maybe like me, your urge is to immediately start installing software and ordering hardware. I'm going to encourage you to pause for a moment and think about what your priorities and goals are. If you can get those clear for yourself, then it's less likely that you're going to spin your wheels and more likely that the various things that you buy will talk to each other and perform in a way that you'll find satisfactory. There are a couple of special considerations that I want to bring out just in case you might otherwise not think about them. And chief among them for me in importance is what the internet typically refers to as the spousal acceptance factor. Now, for those of you who live alone, obviously this is not a concern, but if you live with your parents, if you live with your kids, if you have a significant other, or just a roommate, if you're talking about changing how the house behaves, if you're talking about giving it a personality, that has a lot to do with their life. It has a lot to do with the degree of peace and happiness that you will experience in your own home. So think about these things. When my girlfriend and I decided to buy a house together, I remember telling her, I'd kind of like to try out this home automation stuff. And I was a little disappointed because her reception was not enthusiastic. She has known me for a long time, and she has seen that my projects do not reliably reach the finish line. And when they do, they often have the kind of sharp edges that maybe only a geek can love. And she explained to me very kindly and reasonably that if this was to happen, then it was her expectation that it would be stable and reliable, that it would have a user interface that she found comfortable to use, that it would be something that she could use in conjunction with her own choice of technology. And, that's fair enough. And it definitely changed my plans and it altered some of my decisions. She also said she wanted it not to undermine the beauty of the home, which is something that I might have lost track of. So please take into account the people you cohabitate with. Somewhat relatedly, I also want to mention specifically the concept of graceful degradation. And what I'm talking about here is this. However you approach home automation, it is not realistic for you to imagine that it's going to work all of the time. Even if you only experience planned downtime, that's going to change the situation in your home, maybe more than you expect. I would encourage you to think back on a time when you maybe experienced a lengthy power outage. And remember how strange your own home felt when there was no light and it became stuffy, and your favorite technology that you instinctively reached for was dead and didn't respond. Remember how weird that was? It's like being in an alien place. That is kind of like the feeling that you'll get when you become accustomed to being in a smart home and it suddenly reverts to being a dumb home. And so that's something that's unavoidable in itself. But if you're thinking about graceful degradation, you can at least ensure that the devices in your home are still functional, and hopefully they're not too miserable to use without the benefit of the brain in the middle. So, with these things in mind and having set our priorities for ourselves, I would suggest that the best starting point is for you to choose a brain. Decide what it is that you're going to install right there in the middle of your beloved home. The situation is so different than it was when I first started tinkering with this. There are several top shelf, vibrant projects that are purely open source that you can look into and choose from. The kinds of things that I would find interesting is, what is their technology stack like? And what kind of user interfaces do they provide? And are there any licensing gotchas? Are they compatible with the things I can anticipate wanting to use? Stuff like that. I can't actually tell you anything very much about these ones, other than I remember dimly having looked at them when I was choosing. What I chose was Home Assistant. And what I remember about Home Assistant when I was making that choice is it looked to me like it had the largest install base, but more significantly, that it had users that were all across the spectrum. I saw people on the internet posting that were clearly very nerdy, but also people who clearly weren't and who were all happily using and enjoying Home Assistant. And so I thought, this might be good for me and for my partner. Also, too, it's a very heavy developed software. There's a lot of features coming in all the time. There's a lot of effort going into it. It was impressive to me how quickly it was moving along. It's very flexible, and so I thought that's the one that we want to give a try. And so to begin with, I simply picked up a Raspberry Pi Model 3 that I had laying around doing nothing and installed Home Assistant on it for us to fool around with. And it worked just fine. I don't remember how long we used Home Assistant that way, but I'm going to say maybe 8 months, maybe 10. Never really thought too much about it. The hardware seemed fine. But then there came a point where a Raspberry Pi Model 4 became unemployed in my home. And I thought, well, rather than have this superior hardware sit idle, I'll just go ahead and move Home Assistant over there. And I was surprised what a difference that made. The user interface was immediately snappier, but not just that, it seemed like it was able to act faster. Like lights would go on and off more quickly when they got a command. And in fact, I remember my girlfriend saying, hey, nice upgrade. This thing works much better. I'm like, okay, cool, that was worthwhile. And then a little further down the road, I had to admit to myself, this is not an experiment. I'm not going to install anything else. We like this thing. And in fact, I've spent a stupid amount of time configuring it. Clearly, Home Assistant is our pony. So I went ahead and migrated it again, this time into a virtual machine in our Proxmox server at home, and again enjoyed a bump in its performance. So my experience is that the actual hardware requirements are relatively minimal, just like they say, but the more CPU you give it, the better you're going to like it. The other thing I'll mention is that there are several different ways that you can install Home Assistant if you choose to. And I think you should. It is really good. The one that I started out with and have stayed with is their little appliance distro called HassOS, which is, of course, just enough Linux to run Home Assistant and its dependencies, and everything's sort of wired up in advance. So it's like a little toaster oven. You just plug it in and it goes, right? I have found it to be very stable and reliable, And a benefit of their setup is that it allows you to administer the underlying operating system through the web interface. So you can manage things like operating system upgrades through the main Home Assistant interface, which I have found very, very useful. There is also, of course, a Docker image provided. So if you prefer to install it next to other stuff, you can do that. And you could even go get the source code and set up dependencies yourself and wire it up if you wanted to for some reason. Once you've got your brain set up, whether it's this one or another one, then I'm going to suggest that you start thinking about the network. And I'm an older guy, and I freaking love hardwire networks. To me, that is always the right answer whenever that is an option. I like the speed, I like the reliability, I like the security, I like distributing power on the same wire. To me, it is a win all the way. But unless you are enjoying the benefit of designing and building your own home, it seems a little fanciful. You're not going to have the wiring infrastructure that you need. And trying to put it in place is a super pain in the butt, especially for home automation stuff, because all you need is wires everywhere. So wireless is kind of a given, however you feel about it. And there are devices that support a dizzying array of networking technologies and protocols for home automation nowadays. Things like Bluetooth and Z-Wave, Zigbee and Matter. People use LoRa. There's all sorts of stuff you can fool around with. Generally speaking, a benefit of these is that they are meshing type networks. And so, as you put nodes out, they'll set up a little bucket brigade and extend the network for you automatically, in principle. Also, too, these are generally speaking going to be optimized for low energy consumption. So if you're doing things with batteries, then that's obviously desirable. I can't seem to do anything the sensible or easy way, and so I went a totally different route. Everything that I'm doing is built on Wi-Fi. And as far as I can tell, most people are not doing that. But to me, the benefits here are manifold. I already have a Wi-Fi network. It's already important to me that my Wi-Fi is online, that I've got good coverage throughout my house, that I'm keeping interference down to a low scream. I already have tools for assigning addresses on Wi-Fi, for ensuring that things on Wi-Fi are online. The benefit of low energy is not a big benefit if you're not running stuff on batteries. And I'm mostly not doing that. My thought is that for the most part, what you're automating is stuff that's plugged in the wall anyway. And the amount of energy you're talking about is not huge. It is my impression that most people who are doing home automation are probably running multiple network stacks, that they'll basically have different types of devices they want to use from different manufacturers, which means they have different networks all layered. I guess that works fine. I haven't tried it. I've never needed to look backwards. Wi-Fi has always worked well for me. At any rate, think about your networky stuff, and then you get to that blessed moment when finally and at last you can start picking out and ordering the exciting new hardware that you want to install in your home. Because I'm using Home Assistant, the Home Assistant Integration Directory database is my Bible. This thing is an amazing resource. In Home Assistant terminology, integrations are basically analogous to your web browser add-ons. They're little wads of code that make some particular device or family of devices talk and interact with Home Assistant nicely. And it means that basically somebody's done your work for you. This is a directory of devices that work. And this is a particularly groovy directory because they don't simply say, here is your add-on. They characterize them carefully, and they'll tell you what is the quality of code on this one. How bulletproof do we regard it? So how much has it been hammered on? How many users are there? How long has it been around? So you get an idea of whether you're talking about an alpha quality integration or maybe something that's really tried and true. You can see how many people have it installed, which is a nice thing. But what I've highlighted here, the IoT class, is really the main thing that I'm looking at. That terminology, as far as I know, is unique to Home Assistant, but you can kind of see the implication from the options. Their options include local push and local polling, and then there's cloud push and cloud polling. What we're talking about here is how do we talk to these devices? And this, I think, is the crux of the dilemma for the open source enthusiast who's wanting to do home automation. The brains are open. That's no problem. It's the devices that are going to give you a hassle because these things are built to be proprietary. They're built to silo you. They're built to limit your agency and your options, and you're going to have to fight against them if you want to tame them and make them work in your home under your rules. A lot of folks simply choose devices that are supported and install them. And that may mean that they have to install a proprietary app on their phone to configure and set it up, or even to use it on an ongoing basis. Often you'll have to set up an account on their corporate cloud, and the device has to be permitted to talk either directly or indirectly from your network out to the corporate cloud. Home Assistant then has also to talk to that corporate cloud. So you always have that intermediary for every read of a sensor or for every dictate that you issue to the device. If you are purely motivated by getting the coolest whiz-bang tech in your house at any cost, then this is perhaps not a big deal. I know a lot of people who do this with smiles on their face. It makes me sick to my stomach. This is not where I'm going with this. To me, this is anything but open source. I do not want anybody else's cloud to be an essential part of my home automation. You may or may not, of course, be as freaky as I am when it comes to security and privacy. I feel like those things are really important, and I consider it really unacceptable to have something as intimate as my home so inextricably connected to various corporate clouds. I'm just not going to do it. But even if you don't care about that stuff, push it aside. I feel like there are very practical reasons why you should reject this. One reason is, as a matter of practicality, those devices have significantly higher latency. They have to have a much longer round trip to talk to your devices, and so they're going to be less responsive to you. It also means that if your internet is offline, if Hurricane Helene attacks, then your house just became dumb. That's crummy. What if the routing between their corporate cloud and you has gotten goofed up with your ISP? Well, then you can't talk to your light bulb. What happens if their system is offline? Well, then your light switch quit working. It also means that they dictate on an ongoing basis what your devices are allowed to do. If you buy something because it does A, B, and C just like you wanted, you may find that tomorrow B seems more like a premium feature the more we think about it. And that's going to cost $2 a month from now on if you want to continue enjoying B. Now, maybe you say, I can afford $2 a month. That's not going to break my back. Okay, how many $2 a month are you willing to pay? And have you thought about the fact that by paying $2 a month, you are tying your financial identity to those data packets? All of a sudden, the data that they're snarfing from you became much more valuable when they go to resell it, which they cannot wait to do. And of course, C, which was your favorite feature of all, they've decided to remove entirely because it was poaching a little bit off this other product they would also like to sell you starting Thursday. To me, that is all hot garbage, so I will not use it. I will look only at the local push and local polling options. That means those are devices that are willing to talk to my Home Assistant directly on my network and make no effort to talk out. To me, that's what's up. You will make your own decisions, but that's how I want life to be. What I would like to do now is talk about some different sort of big tent functions, things that I anticipate you'll be interested in doing, and just talk a little bit about how I do it in my house. And first of all is this class that I just made up, which is the plug-in type devices. These are the ones that you're likely to buy first because they are super fast and easy for you to set up. These are things like the smart bulbs that you can just screw into a light fixture and have come alive right away, and these little plug-in boxes that go between like your floor lamp and the electrical outlet and allow you to turn the lamp on and off. Basically just a smart relay is all that is. These things are especially good if you're renting or leasing your property because obviously you're not making any changes to anything. You can reverse that right away. It's also really nice though because you can easily move these things around. I didn't appreciate that as a benefit when I first started messing with this stuff, but it makes it really trivial, particularly for things like holiday lighting, or maybe a setup that you're doing temporarily. You can just put a bunch of this stuff out knowing that you're going to change it later. No sweat. It's not a big deal. There are a million manufacturers and vendors of this class of device. They are incredibly pervasive. This is the one that I like the best, Atham, or possibly At Home. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say it. There's a lot of things in this presentation I don't know how to say, so feel free to giggle. Atham is, like almost all the others, a Chinese manufacturer. I feel like that they are separated, though, from alternatives in several significant ways that, to me, are worth it. One is that Atham has distribution centers both in China and in the United States, which is kind of unique. When you want to buy their stuff, you can decide, do you want to pay more to get it from the American warehouse so it gets to you right away, or do you want to save some money and order from the Chinese warehouse? So if you're anticipating a future need, you order a big wad of stuff and let it come from China at its own speed. That's kind of nice. Now, with this tariff nonsense, I'm not sure if that still holds true. You're going to check that out on your own. I don't know, but that's how it used to work anyway. Atom also makes pretty nice stuff. Compared to the other Chinese manufacturers that I'm used to, I feel like the quality is fairly high, particularly for the price. I have not been dissatisfied, and I've not really had failures from their hardware. The most significant thing that I like about Atom, though, is that you can buy devices from them that have open source firmware already installed. And that to me has two huge benefits. For one, when you buy it, you know without any question that the open source firmware is going to install and work properly. You don't have to guess. And two, you don't have to fight with a stupid thing. You don't have to try and hack it and void its warranty the moment you receive it. Instead, you can get it with the firmware already installed. Now, if you're a particularly cautious individual, maybe you want to reinstall the open firmware yourself just to be sure, if you want. But either way, it's a really nice choice. The next class of hardware that I want to mention is the hardwire stuff. And this is where you start moving the automation out of the sockets and into the house itself, into the circuits of your home. And you might wonder, why would you even want to do that? Like, it seems like extra work, right? But if you think about a ceiling fixture in your bedroom, for example, it may have 2 light bulbs in it or 3 light bulbs in it. Are you going to put 3 smart bulbs in that fixture and control those individually? I mean, you could do that, but it's not very appealing to me. A benefit that I did not mention, I suppose, of the screw-in type smart bulbs is that you can do funny colors, and some people really are invested in that. Admittedly, I did that at the beginning because that's a thing I can now do, but I do not actually disco that much, and so it just hasn't come up. I now find that I prefer to choose a light color and just sort of stick with it, right? The nice thing about the hardwire stuff is that you can use dumb bulbs. And dumb bulbs, in my experience, tend to last longer than the smart ones, I guess because there's less to them and you don't have so much circuitry right there at the source of heat. It's also groovy because at that point you can automate a light fixture regardless of how many bulbs it's got in it, right? And there's some different solutions for this. For years I was messing around with these light switches that replace, the standard light switch in your wall, and they're just not as nicely made. They're not as attractive. Often you can't use a standard switch plate on it, and so this goes into the spousal acceptance factor and diminishing the beauty of one's home, right? They're also not super reliable a lot of the time, and sometimes I don't even necessarily want to wire them directly in because I'm not 100% sure this isn't going to catch fire. Shelly is the company that I have ultimately chosen for this. I think that they have a really unique and smart approach to this. The thing that you get from Shelly is in this photo, the red doolally that's actually in the box. So you see, you get to retain a standard light switch. It simply becomes part of the circuit. And so instead of switching the load, the light switch instead becomes a source of command or information. The light switch tells Shelly to switch the switch. And it's actually a little relay in the red box that's doing the work. The benefit then is that you can use a standard light switch, an attractive, well-manufactured standard one that everyone loves and trusts and will almost certainly not catch fire. And it can tell the switch, tell the circuit to turn the light on, or you can use Home Assistant or whatever to send the instruction to do that. And the super neat thing is you can actually decouple the switch from the relay entirely. In other words, if you, like I, live in a house where you have a light switch here that does something in Cleveland for some reason, you can instead say, when this switch is switched, switch that lamp over there that's quite near it that you would almost expect to be wired to it, right? Or you could say, when I switch this switch, run this Perl script, or when I switch this switch, play an anthem. You can decide what the switch does while also automating the circuit. It is very versatile and very snappy. And Shelly sells versions that switch one circuit, switch 2 circuits, that do dimming, etc. They're really quite snappy. My recommendation of them is still a little lukewarm, though, because although I think that their manufacture and engineering is really good quality, my impression is that their dedication to open source may be waffling. I did most of my buying from them a while back, and I have read online that some of the newer devices maybe do not accept open firmwares or maybe fight with you a little bit. So do your research before you invest. I will say that in my experience, Shelly devices are always willing to work fully locally and talk exclusively to your own home automation system, which is a big plus. Now, if you read the instructions for these things, I don't know how y'all roll, but if you read the instructions, they're going to say, hire an electrician to do this, right? Y'all hiring electricians? I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine doing this at all if I had to pay an electrician to do it, right? But I know people who will not touch electrical stuff. I'm an electronic hobbyist. I don't have good sense. I'm gonna wire it up. I probably am not gonna turn the breaker off. But if you're averse to doing wiring, maybe Shelly is not for you. This is, in fact, the only thing I've ever used to start a fire with my home automation, but that was fully my fault.
Electrician speaking. I was gonna say, so the reason why these things tend to start open in the hobby space and then start to close up is because of what you're saying. You set a fire with this thing, and you're dealing with UL listed devices that are you're dealing with fire. So it's all
Yep.
about liability. So it's when you're at an end user device with something that's connected to copper with, it's hard to. That's where when the foot hits the pavement, it's hard to keep things open at that stage.
Yeah, fair enough. And I just want to be clear in saying it was 100% my fault when that fire got started. I mean, that was on me. Okay. The next thing I want to mention, what's that? It was just a wee fire. It was actually in the garage. I was working on the garage opener, and it's one of these things where, like, intellectually I know better, but obviously I do not in fact know better, because I'm not even dealing with line current. The Shelly thingies are really flexible, and so, like, I'm going the wrong direction. They will work directly with line current. They will also work with DC current, so you can hook them up different ways. And so I was sourcing 12 volts from the garage opener to power the Shelly, and also having the Shelly tell the garage door opener to open and shut, and all these sorts of things. But while I was doing that, I was on a ladder, I was upside down, I was talking to my girlfriend, I wasn't paying good attention. I reversed the polarity, and it caught on fire like instantly. I mean, it did not pause, it didn't hesitate. There was no like moment of drama. I mean, there was a fire in my hand. So, don't do that. Climate stuff is something that you're going to want to fool around with probably. I have found this to be surprisingly utilitarian. Lots of devices will also measure your temperature and also measure your humidity, because that's just so easy and cheap to do, and then they get to advertise that it also has these features. But the also ones are usually kind of hand wavy approximate, and that's not super exciting to me. I fooled around with some different solutions here. Ultimately, I actually wound up with another Shelly device. This one is battery powered, but it will run for over a year on a set of batteries, which is pretty nice. It does talk Wi-Fi, and it's really cunning because basically it wakes itself up just ever so slightly to check the environmental conditions, and only if they have changed substantially does it wake the rest of the circuitry up, get up on the network, and send an update. So you don't get updates like clockwork. You get them when they're interesting, right? But it also has an e-paper display, so it's a little time and temperature thing, which I think is kind of neat, and it comes in different sort of attractive or neutral colors, so I just sort of put these all over the house. And it's a good example, maybe the only example, of where I do these silly things and only later realize that actually it was like super useful, and like I want to take credit for that, because our HVAC system sort of mostly kind of works. I don't know about you, but like we have a thermostat that's in the hallway, and it makes sure the hallway is really comfortable all the time, which is where I don't sleep. And so when I bring an HVAC technician in and say, this whole thing is stupid and terrible, and can you make it work even sort of reasonably, then they're like, stupid homeowner, right? I mean, anecdote data is not useful to a technician. They shut me down just like I would shut them down. You know how it is. But when I can show them charts and graphs of the temperature and humidity in every room of my house cross-correlated with when the HVAC is running, they're like, oh, snap, that ain't working. Where the flip is it? I'm like, no, it is not. So it's pretty cool. HVAC, closely related, is something that you're going to want to do. And in a way, this is like the most mundane of all home automation, right? Like so many people are using stuff like Nest nowadays, which are offensively invasive of your privacy. Probably, please don't use that. But I wanted something, obviously, that was fully local, that was only Wi-Fi, and that I could talk to with my home assistant. That is a pretty tough thing to accomplish, I found. There are not many options. I wound up with this thing that I had never heard of before, this company Vinstar. I guess they're kind of big. They do all those things. It works on the Wi-Fi. It has a color touch screen, and it has an open API, just like a REST interface that I can talk to. So you can control it through your home automation system and get data from it as well. One thing that I thought was really neat about this particular solution is that they also offer a remote sensor, which also talks Wi-Fi, so you can put that anywhere in your house. And so despite the fact that this is wired to the stupid wiring in your stupid hallway, you can put the sensor in your bedroom, right? And then you can tell this thing, average the two things together and consider that to be the temperature. Or in fact, you know what? Forget about the hallway. Look at the bedroom. That's what's important. Make it nice in there, and it will do it. So that's pretty great. And thinking about graceful degradation, that's all self-contained stuff, right? So as long as the Wi-Fi is working, this all works, even if the home assistant is offline. It's still a little hard for me to recommend because, like, yes, it's a color touchscreen, but it's one from like the early 2000s. Like, it's faux nice. It's not futuristic at all. And it costs more than you want it to, but it's worked really well for me. So I don't hate it. Speaking of vacuums, that is something I was pretty interested in. I had the first Roomba. I don't know if any of y'all did. It was hilariously terrible, like a bump and go toy, right? It was by no means impressive, and it turned me off to the idea of robot vacuums for years. But eventually, when I realized that people who I did not respect their intellects were having their floors vacuumed by robots, I thought, I have got to look at this again, probably. And so what I found is they're incredibly sophisticated now. I mean, they have LiDAR scanners, and they've got color cameras doing SLAM to locate and map throughout your house. They've got bump sensors and infrared ranging, and they freaking talk. It's running Linux inside. They're hellishly privacy invasive. These things are the worst. Y'all remember where the Roomba contractors were looking at people on the commode and posting those on Facebook and that? I mean, who wants this in their home, right? Except my floors are dirty. So I did a lot of research, and ultimately I found this wonderful thing called Valetudo. Valetudo is the frickin' best. It can't replace the firmware because the firmware is so intricate and sophisticated. But what Valetudo does is even more satisfying. It replaces part of the firmware. It creates an open source virtual reality shell around it. It thinks it's talking to that Korean corporate cloud and sharing information with it. But really, it's talking to Valetudo. And Valetudo is providing me with a beautiful web interface that gives me full control and configuration of my vacuum, and it integrates perfectly with my home assistant. And now we're friends. That is a real live photo of me hacking Charlie. Charlie is my vacuum because he does the Charlie work. To do that, it was just a matter of popping off a cover and hooking up that little USB to UART converter. If you're an electronics nerd, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, then sorry. But just hook that up. You have to do some decryption of your serial number to the password. There's a whole thing to get a root. But then when you log into it, you just basically get a root shell, start downloading the new firmware, and soon it's your friend. And Charlie and I have gotten along beautifully ever since. So Valetudo, as you might imagine, that is a fairly sophisticated and intense hack. It's way cool, these folks that are doing this. But it's a moving target because they're constantly trying to lock you out of the vacuums. And so there's a group of hackers that are just constantly trying to keep pace with the security on these vacuums. So if you're interested, you're definitely going to have to go to this website and read through it because it is a little involved. And they will tell you what right now is the best vacuums to buy. That's how I wound up with this dream thing. But it's worth doing. I made some mention earlier of open firmwares. I want to speak about that just a little bit more specifically. I can't take credit for having been smart about this. I didn't mean to do it, but by choosing Wi-Fi, in a way, I made it really a lot more likely that I could hack my devices. What I didn't think through then, but I now understand, is that Internet of Things type devices that speak Wi-Fi almost invariably have espressive chipsets inside. I'm talking about the ESP32 and the ESP8266. You know what I'm talking about. The electronics nerds use those things very prevalently nowadays because they're cheap and they're powerful and they talk Wi-Fi. And because the electronic nerds and the open source nerds love them, there's big, beautiful tool chains. There's lots of code for them. There's open firmwares. And so when you buy cheap Wi-Fi IoT stuff, often, no matter how much it wants to not do what you want it to, you can pop that sucker open and load your own code into it. And that's kind of satisfying. So there's two particular open firmwares I want to mention to you. The one that I like the best and I use most pervasively is called Tasmota. And I like it because it is super user-friendly. When you get this thing installed in your device and you power it up, it just creates a little access point. connect to it with anything that can talk Wi-Fi, pull it up in your web browser, show it what your credentials are for your Wi-Fi, and then reboot it again. It comes up on your Wi-Fi network, and you get a beautiful little web interface that allows you to say, hello, Tasmota, you now are a this thing, and you have these actuators, and you have these sensors, and here's the Wi-Fi network, and here's my home automation system. And it's like, cool, let's do all that. It'll show you what the sensors say. It will let you directly control the actuators. So if your home automation system is offline, you could actually go to the web interface of the individual device and manually control it. Graceful degradation. And it's easy to over the air upgrade the firmware if you need to. It is super friendly and super good. The other one that I want to mention, I do not use as often, but it can solve many problems. It is ESP Home. ESP Home has a very different vibe. This is a firmware that you install. It ain't got no web interface. Instead, you write up a little YAML file and you explain life to it. So you give it its firmware, you give it the YAML configuration, and then you reboot it and cross your fingers. And if everything went well, it comes up on your network and shows up in your home automation system. And if not, then you do those steps again. I still like it. It has broader hardware support. In addition to the Espressif chipsets, it will also talk to the RP2040. So again, if you're an electronics nerd, you know what I'm talking about. That's a pretty snappy little chip development board. Also a few other obscure ones. I don't know if anybody's using them. And it makes it super easy to build your own stuff from scratch. If that's something you're interested in doing, ESP Home makes that very easy. So also worth thinking about. So here's an example of an unfriendly device that I'm forcing to be open source. This is an IR blaster. I couldn't even tell you what offensive hardware, firmware it had on it to begin with, but I've just popped it open with a spudger. And if you're an electronics nerd, you'll see, look at those test points right there. Makes it easy for them to load the firmware, makes it easy for me to load the firmware. So once that thing's open, once again, my little USB to UART, just hook that up, force it into programming mode, and drop Tasmota into its brain. And now suddenly it's friendly and cooperative, and that's pretty groovy. And I know what you're thinking. IR blaster, what? What are you talking about? Ain't nobody using IR. Actually, that is something you should not sleep on, because infrared remote is a really cool API almost to talk to lots of things that don't actually get to the level of smart but are not totally stupid. There's a lot of things on the market that don't want to be part of your home automation, but they have a remote control. And all those things, you can point the remote at your IR blaster, teach it the codes real quick, and all of a sudden, it's part of your home automation system. So certainly it's worth having one of these in whatever room you've got your TV and all that sort of jazz in. But this one actually is for a totally different purpose. I don't know if y'all have ever seen them, but there's a company called Luminara that makes electric candles. They have the most persuasive fake fire effect. It legit looks like a real candle from just like a few inches away. They're really magic. They run on a couple of batteries, and they have a stupid infrared remote. So now I have stupid electric candles throughout my house that are home automation. I love it. I have not done much in the way of custom hardware, but I have done a little bit. I am deeply moved by Halloween. Halloween is my frickin' jam. And when I first started doing this stuff, I was using those little plug-in relay switch things, like a lot of them in the yard to control animatronics and lighting and things. I was using too many of them, and they're not weatherproof, and so it's kind of a hassle to keep them from dying in the yard. And so eventually I got around to making some of these. There's almost nothing to it. It's shameful for me to say I made them. This board is just a cheap Chinese thing. It's an 8 relay control board. I could see that it had an Espressif chip, and that's all I really needed to know. I think it cost $20. And so then I just got, this weatherproof enclosure, which is made for splicing your extension cords when you're silly about holidays, and then just a little AC to DC converter. And then it's just a matter of doing some wiring. And now I've got these little nodes that I can put throughout my yard and just like hang all the decorations off of, and it's really quite swell. So let me mention to you, there are some neat things that you can attach to your home automation system. And again, I'm talking about Home Assistant because this is kind of what I know about, but that people will often install next to it and then integrate them together. Like Music Assistant, for example. Home Assistant doesn't have any audio stuff built into it ordinarily for doing music, but if you'd like to have whole house music, Music Assistant rather, will play audio on lots of different hardware, and it will synchronize it. So, it's lovely from room to room as you walk. Node-RED is super popular, it seems, I don't use it myself. It's one of these visual programming doolollies where you drag Lego bricks around, on the screen. Some people like to do that for automations. I go the opposite direction. AppDaemon is what I really dig because it lets me run sandboxed Perl scripts. Not Perl, Python. Python scripts are the ones that I like. So I write little Python scripts mostly for Halloween, and this thing lets me trigger them based on different sets of circumstances and stuff, which is pretty groovy. And if you're interested in doing video surveillance stuff throughout your house, then I strongly suggest you look at Frigate. Frigate is not necessarily, it doesn't require Home Assistant or anything, but it's designed to tie into it very intimately. And it's a very nifty system. Frigate can do local object and person recognition type stuff and tag videos for you and send you alerts and all that sort of thing. It's very fancy and cool. I said many words. I will now offer to answer any questions or concerns or complaints that you may have.
I appreciate the fact that you focus on cloudless or cloud-free home automation stuff. And I'm there too. I started in 1998 with Mr. House. Still using. It's running some.
You're still using it?
I'm still using.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I don't do that much with it. A few light switches, the HVAC thermostat, stuff like that. But have you like validated that maybe is it Vanguard or Vantech? The Ventec, the HVAC thermostat you have, that it's not phoning home?
I can't tell that it is. It doesn't appear to me like it's making any effort to.
If you actually look to see it, it says
Yeah.
IP address
They do have a cloud solution, and they offer for you to set up an account and with an API key, and then they'll give you a way to automate it and all that sort of jazz. But they also specifically in the interface give you the ability to go fully local and tie into the API, which is, I really appreciated.
All right. Are you running your own Internet of Things secluded network apart from your regular Wi-Fi, just in case some of the devices are compromised with bad firmware that could then try to hack anything else on your?
I'm not. And I recognize the wisdom in that, and it's something I've thought about doing, but because my focus has been primarily on running as much open source as possible, I'm not as concerned as I would be if I were using commercial solutions. But I suppose it is to some degree cavalier of me to not do that. I just kind of peep in on it from time to time and try and make sure there's nothing that seems weird or scary.
Yeah, because I don't know, for me, not all my devices on my Internet of Things are open source, so I do run my own separate, network for that, so that if that device did get compromised and it tried to hack into other computers, it's just going to find another light bulb or something.
Right. And it's maybe something I should have mentioned, but I think my essential philosophy is a lot different from most reasonable people's, in that if I can't find a way to do it that I feel is in accord with my principles, I'm just like, well, I don't need to do that badly. I'm just goofing around with this, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of hardcore about it. There's things that I just don't do. So, for example, the automated kitty litter systems, that is the biggest failure that I have so far. I have not found a way to do that is at all privacy friendly, and my girlfriend is not super happy with me about that. I really aspire to solve that problem at some point.
I'm glad you mentioned the kitty litter. I was going to ask about cameras. I walked in 3 minutes late, so I may have missed something at the beginning, but are there any Wi-Fi cameras that don't totally compromise your privacy?
There are definitely cameras that will run open source firmware that I feel personal trust in and don't have any worry about, either because you buy from an open manufacturer or more likely because I put open firmware on an existing piece of hardware. But it's moot for me because my partner, one of the fundamental ground rules was no cameras in the house. And so it's just not been something I've had to look at or think about because that was never going to be an option.
For the IoT network, I actually do. Sometimes you have to poke a hole in for those devices to the Home Assistant URL, but that's typically how they can communicate back, or whatever service they're using, like MQTT or something like that.
Right.
And then you can do client isolation as well, so that way on the Wi-Fi, if it's on the Wi-Fi, then the only device it can see is itself. So you can have both the firewall rules in place to block it from going to other networks, as well as the client isolation from a Wi-Fi perspective.
Right on.
But like I said, sometimes you have to poke holes back. I actually had the Home Assistant preview voice edition, and that one took me a while because I did not realize you had to poke the hole back for it to communicate back through to Home Assistant. But that seems to be some of the ESP devices seem to be you can directly connect from Home Assistant to them, but then that one had to be able to communicate back into Home Assistant itself.
I've read that Home Assistant has very sophisticated voice control and voice assistant features nowadays. That doesn't interest me, and I haven't played with it, but they're even making hardware that you can put out there, sort of like the little Amazon Dots or whatever, if you're down with that sort of thing. I've actually been surprised myself how little automation I have in my home automation system. I have built many automations over time, and the thing that I keep running into is it's really hard to give them enough context to ensure that what they're doing is not stupid a significant amount of the time. And so like sometimes it's comical, but sometimes it's just annoying. And so usually when I set automations up, they don't survive very long. What I have found that I value the most is just having centralized control on my smartphone. It's become the dashboard that controls everything in the house. And something I should perhaps have mentioned about Home Assistant, they have an app, which is really snappy, that's on iOS, it's on Android, it's fully open, it's on F-Droid, and so I can install it, and my girlfriend can install it, it's compatible with all of our technology, and so we can control everything from the HVAC to the AV system, the whole business. Anything else, friends?
We have a new Train HVAC system.
Whew.
It is a compatible thermostat according to Home Assistant, but it has to use, I think, some kind of API access and obfuscation required to get it on Home Assistant. Is that something that is a workaround? Just give it the Wi-Fi, like Wi-Fi, internet only on one VLAN, and fire rule that back to Home Assistant and get that API to work?
You probably could. My only experience with the train automation stuff has been through my work, and it is a very sordid tale of misery. So I don't feel optimistic, but I'm sure that probably it's a thing you can make it work.
I was curious about the IR blaster in the slides.
Yeah.
So I actually have a Flipper Zero that I use for my garage door opener because we only have one remote. So I was curious what brand of IR blaster that was.
Well, actually, since I got the one in that photo and hacked it, Atham started selling ones that have open firmware on them, so you might start there. Anyone else?
Just a simple comment on the poking holes in the separate Wi-Fi in the separate network for thing. I actually, mine runs on Proxmox. I actually added an additional network interface on Proxmox. So mine's actually dual homed. I have the web access and everything on my main LAN, and I have a separate network interface in my IoT LAN.
Oh yeah, that's a cool idea.
So, and that still allows it to scan the IoT network and pick up the automatic stuff on that network.
It also works to security in your IoT network. And if you really have separate security thoughts for your internal IoT, you can actually set up multiple IoT LANs and have bridges between them for your systems to work through, and you can even have firewalls between them if you wanted to.
Right on.
Your Shelly Enwall devices, the purpose on that was it? I'm sorry, was for the sake of having a standard switch in front of it. I'm just wondering what the experience of that is like. Is toggling up and down and whatnot. Is a toggle scenario of if it's off and I turn it on, so now the light's going to come on, but then via automation I turn it off, and so now when I want to use the physical switch again, I have to turn it off to turn it on, or how does that work?
You got it. Basically, you just don't think of up as being on. You just think of like when you want to switch the state, you need to toggle the toggle irrespective of what position it's in, basically. And some types of switch mechanism make that feel more bizarre than others, but that's always basically how it works. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for your time and attention.